This Chattahoochee landing on the Apalachicola River. That's the Highway 90 bridge. It's the boat landing right there. That's the Indian Mound. We'll talk about that later. Used to be 7 mounds here. Kind of remnants of one. You see a mound on the road coming in. That little rise that the big oak trees grown out of, that's the remnants of one mound there. There's not too much left of the Indian mounds. Kind of the important ones right here. There's a historical marker. Okay, the historical marker is Nichols Outpost. This was Colonel Nichols' fort during the War of 1812. Built a outpost here in 1814, had a treaty with the Indians. And you can read about in Dale Cox's book, Nichols Outpost, about Colonel Edward Nichols and the history of the fort here, known as Apalachicola Fort. Well, from on top of the mound, have a view. There's the boat ramp, the Apalachicola River. This is a strategic point, and another important part is that this mound stays high and dry because during times the river floods, and so another important part about this place is that when the river floods, it keeps you out of the water here. So another important part why they have a fort here. And you can see the Woodruff Dam there. Now on the dock on the river you see Woodruff Dam, Lake Seminoles on the other side. The mound right here, this used to be Spanish Florida in 1817. And on the other side of the dam is the confluence. The Apalachicola River turns into the Flint and Chattahoochee River, and that would turn into what's now Georgia and Alabama. And on the other side, the confluence of the river, you have the Foul Town, Seminole Town, or sometimes they'd also be called creeks up there. And beyond that, you had Fort Scott. Well, Neamatha was the leader of Foul Town, the Seminole leader, and he played both sides. He is friendly to the British, and the Americans demanded that he come to Fort Scott in 1817, but Neamatha did not want to talk to General Clinch. He did not trust him. He said that it's his town. He did not take part in the war. So I think his General Gaines actually at Fort Scott, who sent Colonel Twiggs down to Foul Town to bring Neamatha over there to Fort Scott. Neamatha did not want to go, so the Indians are just in the town minding their own business. Soldiers show up with armed guns and start shooting at the Indians. The Indians, alarmed, start shooting back and run away. And so the soldiers come into town, and the Indians, of course, start shooting. Soldiers leave and come back with more soldiers, 300 soldiers. The soldiers return, I think the next day or the day after, with 300 soldiers. This time the town is deserted, and they take all the, I guess, whatever they could carry of the livestock and the corn, and burn the town. And that's the beginning of the First Seminole War. As far as the Indians are concerned, they declared war on them. Indians, of course, are not happy. They figure that was unprovoked on them. And so that brings us here to the other side. On the bend of the river, a supply boat is coming up to Fort Scott. They heard that there was some trouble. There's a boat captain, or the lieutenant in charge of the boat, a Lieutenant Scott. The fort is named after Winfield Scott, so you know, no relation. Anyway, the boat's 2 barges, moving very slow, hard to maneuver, coming up the river at night. On this bend of the river, almost up at the fort. They think they're safe. It's at night. The wind blows the barges into the shore, very thick wood line. When it's blown to the shore, the Indians are waiting for them. They attack. They fire on the boat. There's about 40 soldiers aboard. They kill most of them. About 6 or 8 of the soldiers jump overboard and escape and make it to Fort Scott. There's about 6 women who are killed. One of them's captured, Elizabeth Stewart, and she is freed about 9 months later at the Battle of Ecofina River down in Florida. And so that is another part of the First Seminole War, but that happened about a week later and known as the Scott Massacre. You can read about the Scott Massacre right here in Dale Cox's book. Cover of the book is that picture right there in the bend of the river. What the author Dale Cox wants to do, and really endorse this project, is to get a historical marker right here for the Scott Massacre, raise the funds, do it ourselves, put it right here along the riverbank for the Scott Massacre. This is one of the incidents that started the First Seminole War. It caused General Jackson to rally the troops in Tennessee and bring down the 3,000 soldiers. 1,000 of them were Creek Indians, and began the First Seminole War. Also caused Congress, really created an international incident, which caused Florida to become U.S. territory, which was the result of the First Seminole War. The result of the First Seminole War was Spain decided it could no longer hold on to Florida. Andrew Jackson had captured Pensacola twice, and so negotiations took off and continued to hand over Florida to the United States. Our story of the Scott Massacre ends in Fort Gaines, Georgia, 60 miles to the north. Elizabeth Stewart, who survived, moved to this house. Is still standing in downtown Fort Gaines, Georgia. There's a big oak tree right over here. Let me show you the historical mark. The large oak tree said to be planted by General Gaines, as the story goes. Very massive oak tree. And this 2-story house here, said to have been built by John Dill from money saved that his wife Elizabeth Stewart hid in her dress when captured from the Indians in downtown Fort Gaines, Georgia.